Welcome back, guys, to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I am fortunate to have Samuel Lalanne with me. Sam is an executive director at Morgan Stanley as the global head of diversity and inclusion for the firm's institutional securities group. Prior to joining Morgan Stanley in 2019, Sam spent 19 years at Citi in various leadership roles, including as a senior vice president of Citi's global diversity and talent management team. Sam, thank you so much for being on.
My pleasure. Nice to be with you, Arnav.
Awesome. So, take it back for us to the beginning, where you grew up, your family situation, what type of kid you were, things of that nature.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, thanks again for having me. So, background. I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. Suburbs of New York City, in its shadow, and I think that had a lot to do with how I went about the rest of my life. I grew up as a first generation American. My parents are from Haiti. I have an older brother and two older sisters. So I like to joke that I didn't just grow up with one set of parents. I grew up with a brother that played the role of as an additional father, and my two sisters to this day are still have a very motherly relationship with me, just because of the age difference. So very much grew up in a loving home, a home based off of our faith and our beliefs, and just a really tight knit home unit. Also really appreciated and benefited from the fact that I was around not just my immediate family, but a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins. So family, that community was a big part of my upbringing, growing up in Connecticut.
Talk to me a little bit about your Haitian background. How important or not important has that been while as you grew up? Have you been to Haiti or things of that nature?
Yeah, I go often. So yeah, no, it's been very important in terms of who I am and what I've become, and I think it's some of the subtle things, right? The work ethic. I think with most Haitian Americans, coming to this country, it's about establishing yourself, getting into the workforce, working really hard, being appreciative of all that you have, glass half full types of personalities and attributes. So for me, for example, just that instilled in me a work ethic at a very young age. I started with the paper routes, and I think I've worked every summer since maybe my summer going into my freshman year of high school,
Wow.
uh, and that was just part of what I needed to do, and it was just a sense of what my role should be. I wasn't taking summers off. I was working hard and trying to learn, and that was something that I think has a lot to do with my background, my cultural background.
Growing up in Stamford, did you have a large Haitian community, or was that something, when you went to school, were you kind of hiding that background, or
No, it's a really good question. I think my answer to that is my parents moved to Connecticut, um, really at the forefront of, I guess, the Haitian community moving into Connecticut. So they're one of the first, and the extended family soon followed thereafter. So growing up at an early age, it wasn't the largest community, but it has built up significantly over time. So it was almost a matter of pride, to bring that culture into that area, which how I looked at it and how my parents looked at it and everyone that that followed. So no, it wasn't something that I hid. It was something that I acknowledged, and tried as much as possible to bring that out in the different environments that I was in. I think back to being in elementary school, and in middle school in Stanford, in public school, just sharing the differences in terms of cuisine with other kids in the neighborhood. There was I grew up in a relatively diverse cultural community in in Stanford, I had an opportunity to, go to friends' homes and of different backgrounds, and sharing my Haitian background with them and learning about their different backgrounds was really at the forefront of my learning of the diversity inclusion space. And I think that has a lot to do with some of the career decisions I made later on in my life. I would also say, though, that changed when, you know, in middle school in seventh grade, I ended up going to Greenwich, Connecticut, into a private all boys school. Very different, very different educational system there, and bringing that to there to that school was difficult because it was new for me, right? Going as a seventh grader, going to an all boys school and a private school in a very affluent town was just a new experience that I had to transition into. And so it wasn't just bringing my Haitian culture and background. It was also being, a Black man. It was also being someone that didn't come from that same world. So that was an interesting turning point early on in my life.
How did you navigate that transition? Because now you're interacting with, you know, people that are coming from wealthier families. Did, you know, did you, I mean, I guess at that age, did it really open your eye, to the extremes of the world?
Yeah, no, it was definitely obvious to see, but I think it goes back to what I mentioned at the top in terms of perspectives and my viewpoint, my personality, the lessons my parents instilled in me. So rather than harping on them, rather than just calling out those differences and letting it negatively impact how I come across or what I say or do, I use them as opportunities, opportunities to learn more, opportunities um, to learn about different cultures, different backgrounds, how different people make decisions, how different people communicate, and that background helped me to approach every opportunity in a meaningful way, and I learned from them. I
Yeah.
think back to my first day of school. I was we were kind of gathered together on the field. It was like a recess or something, and we were going around picking teams, right? Everyone's been through this situation before. The last thing you want, the last thing you want is to be picked last, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, that was on my mind, and I wasn't picked last. And that was the beginning of, okay, this is going to work out. And although no one here knows me, but a lot of them had gone to school since kindergarten together. For me, it was, okay, I can do this, I can do this. And that propelled me to take every opportunity with a class, have full perspective. And that helped me to make the best out of every situation. It seems silly, seems small in comparison, a very innocuous scenario or example. But I think if that story went a different way, that might have negatively impacted my experience
Yeah.
at the very beginning, which who knows what comes after that. So for me, it was a very positive moment, my first day there, and I was able to feel like a sense of belonging there that matured over time. That was middle school, but it was the same school for upper school or high school. And I continued those friendships. And to this day, I'm, still a very tight knit group that graduated from that class.
Yeah. Talk to us about what you were like as a kid. What were some of your interests? And, if you can remember at that time, what did you, I guess, want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I think the story on me from anyone that would know me back then was I always had this level of maturity beyond my years um, as a young man, a young boy, and I think that was, I was serious but personable. I think that had a lot to do with the environment that I was in. Growing up, I was around a lot. My three siblings that I mentioned earlier are older than me. There's a 7-year difference between my closest sibling, a 14, 15-year difference between two of my older siblings.
Yeah.
So I was always around older people. Besides my cousin and I, who was around the same age as me, most of my at home life was around older people. So I think that helped to bring the sense of maturity to the, how I carried myself, the decisions that I made. Maybe working at an early age also played a role in that as well. So I definitely think that's one. Always, I've always been an extrovert. Um, it has never been an issue, learning and being around different types of people, communicating with different types of people. And I think maybe that's because of the different environments that I've been in at an early age. Fast forward in terms of kind of some of the things that I saw as a young person, and that led to some of the decisions I made later on in life. Growing up in, as I mentioned, Stamford, Connecticut, one of the suburbs of New York City, for me, it was, I knew at an early age, 11, 12, that I wanted to be in the city, that I wanted to be in Manhattan. That was a dream of mine, and I was going to get there no matter what at some point in the future. And, that's something that I remember thinking about a lot back in those days. So that was definitely something that led to me ending up in New York City later on in my life after college.
Yeah. Were you interested in business at that age? I mean, I'm not even sure if high schoolers even know what, business is, but do you,
So yeah, well, that's a really really good question, Arnav. I wasn't thinking about it in middle school, but will tell you when I started high school, that was right around the time of the dot-com boom,
mm,
right? So it was all around. You had all these different companies opening up, dot-com internet businesses. It was really exciting time for a lot of people, and that's really the environment that I grew up in high school. It was part of everything that we were doing. It was part of everything that I was seeing around society, both in the U.S. locally as well as worldwide. So I think that had definitely something to do with some of my early inklings to go into business and starting a company or understanding how businesses are run. And it was also at the same time going into my classes for my senior year of high school. My dad thought it would be a good idea to take an econ class. So I did that and I loved it.
yeah,
Macro, micro, I loved everything about it. And it was so much different from all the other classes that I had taken, the arts classes, the science classes. It was just different. So that was another important, I guess, moment in terms of navigating my future and being interested in business, finance, economics, etc. And that led me to when I got to Boston College um, to major in econ and finance. So if it wasn't for the dot-com boom and maybe my dad suggesting I take that econ class in high school, I'm not sure.
yeah,
Those were two of the main reasons why I did.
yeah. Talk to us about your decision to go to BC. Were you considering other schools, and then I guess what ultimately made you choose BC?
Yeah, I had a plan when it came to schools. Like I had some criteria, but then I was also open ended on things that I wasn't sure about. So and and honestly, that's kind of how I approach a lot of things.
Yeah,
So the criteria for me is I wanted to stay local. I wanted to be in the Northeast. I wanted to go into business, so I wanted to be part of a business school for undergrad, whether it was finance or econ or something else. I knew that was where I was going to focus my time. So I was looking for a school that was credible in that area and had a good reputation and a good program. Separately, I also think what I wasn't sure about is what size school did I want to be in, right? Was it a large school, big state school, or a smaller school? Wasn't sure about that, so I was going to navigate that. So that was part of my process in terms of touring different schools and figuring out what would work and what wouldn't. The other thing I knew I wanted is I wanted to be around near a city. It didn't have to be New York City because I knew I was going to end up there anyway, but either New York City or Boston or some other major city. But I knew that I wanted some of that campus environment as well and didn't need to be in the city specifically. So that's a pretty good set of criteria, I think, going in.
yeah,
and like you're Nav, I'm a big sports fan. I love sports. So, looking for, and I grew up watching college basketball and college football. So being around an environment like that where I could do that out of school was also part of the conversation. So that was all the criteria that I took. But then I went through a bunch of different tours of different campuses, some, on my own, some with my family, some with some friends. And Boston College just checked off everything on that list. It
Yeah.
Campus environment that's near a city, but not in the city. It's great school system, great academic reputation, great scholastics in sports and a culture and community around it that I also really liked. The class sizes, a mix of small classrooms versus lecture style. I could get a little bit of both. I can go on and on,
Yeah. Yeah.
but proximity to home, so I would be able to go home whenever I wanted. My parents could come up and visit, and just being close. So that's how I landed at BC. It wasn't the only school I looked at. It wasn't it wasn't the first school I thought about, but it checked off everything off my list.
Talk to us about like getting to BC. What was, you know, what was your life like as a college student? Um, what were some of the fun parts? Maybe what were some of the tougher parts? Things like that.
Yeah, no, it was, in general, it was a very positive experience. Um, I love my time at BC. But I think it goes back to what I said before. One of the first things that I thought about was, in addition just to going to school and being part of the school atmosphere, I also wanted to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did.
Yeah.
I worked while I was at BC my freshman year. I married two passions, right? I knew I wanted to work, but where I wanted to work, I wasn't quite sure. And this opportunity came around to be a student equipment manager in the athletics department.
Yeah.
That's perfect, right? I love sports. I wanted to be around the sports scene at BC, although I wasn't an athlete myself, and to work. So I got that opportunity to work for the athletics department, and more specifically work for the football team during my time at BC. Something that I really love doing. It was just an awesome experience. I can go into more detail there, but essentially at the end of the day, it's being a part of having an organized set of activity, which was going to keep me focused on school, right? Not allow me to kind of just get distracted by all the other things that are happening around campus. I like that type of organization, but also it was fun. I got to go on road games, visited some high profile, highly successful college institutions in terms of their football programs, going to Notre Dame and University of Miami during their heyday. And the first bowl game that I went to was in Hawaii.
Wow.
Like,
That's
really
cool.
cool experiences for a college kid. So that worked out really well, and that had a large part to do with my experience at school. In navigating, being part of a community, having a focus, having a regimented schedule, keeping me in line and focused, and taking advantage of all that had to offer. So that was pretty cool.
To give some perspective, like that's a lot of hours for a college student taking full-time classes to work for the football team. I mean, what are we talking about? At least probably 20 to 25 a week.
Easily.
Yeah, if not more. Like,
Yeah, easily. And that has nothing, and not including on the weekends when there's game days,
yeah,
or a traveling schedule where you'd leave on a Friday night, and come back late Saturday night. So it was a big responsibility, big time commitment, but I loved a lot of it.
yeah. Looking back on that, I do, especially having the perspective of, you know, you know, 20 years being removed from it, did it help in learning any corporate skills? I'm just curious because, while college football team is not a bit like, I mean, it is a business, but like, it's run like an organization in the sense that, the equipment manager needs to have his things together for the guy to even show up on the, I mean, there's
Yeah,
so many level of detail that needs to be right from from the bottom to the top in order to be successful. Do you look back and did you learn any lessons from that?
tons of lessons. And it's a good call out, a football team, football in an athletics department in general, right? Not just for the football team, but I'll just give it from the perspective of a football team. Operationally, it has to be run really efficiently and really tight. And there's so many different things that are coming up. So yes, I learned a lot. I think in terms of what I saw day in and day out is around practice, right? How are practices run? What's really important for those that are not haven't played football or not around a college football program? One of the there's a script for practices. Everything is on a time schedule. Everything's on a timeline. There's no room for being late. There's no room for kind of lollygagging or lazily coming into a situation. You just don't walk out to the field, and when everyone's there, you start practice. Everything is on a very specific schedule. Not a 10-minute, 20-minute schedule, but 3 minutes for this, 4 minutes for this, and everything has to run like clockwork. And there's a rhythm to it. And I think watching that and participating in that and having responsibilities that lined up to that type of organization really got me focused on things that I would later use in my career, like project management, having a plan, being prepared, knowing what to expect and how to deal with it. One example would be, when you think about practices or equipment, is the changing weather. So you have to look ahead and understand what the weather is going to be, and then how to kind of address, and having the right equipment, the right gear for different weather environments. The length of the cleats that you screw into the bottom of the shoes, dependent on the conditions, and you have to think ahead. If you go on a road trip, you have to expect that there's going to be different challenges. The weather might change, so you're not just preparing for a 80-degree sunny day in Miami, you're also prepared for, a hurricane
Yeah.
and disastrous or inclement weather in general. So preparation, both in practices and small things and in big things like games and everything in between, the travel, how to get from place to place, et cetera, was something that I saw firsthand and had responsibilities that were based off of those things. There's some bigger things too, I would say. One is the relationship between coaches and players, that leadership, and navigating tough environments. A football team is a bunch of players, close to, in some cases, 80 to 100 players. They all come from different backgrounds, all have different needs. And even at school, different situations come up, and understanding the needs and showing empathy for each of the different players. And that's firsthand what I saw with coaches that did it really well and coaches that probably struggled with it. Leadership. What does leadership look like, both on the side of the players as well as the coaches and administration? How do you deal with challenges? How do you deal with chaos? How do you deal with uncertainty? I was in school during 9/11, and I was part of the football team when the tragedy and the tragic events of 9/11 occurred. And what was the messaging back to the players? How did they navigate that? How did they, how were they there to support each other? And what does leadership look like in those situations?
Yeah.
That was another piece.
Yeah. I also saw that your 3 summers outside of your academic year at BC, you had internships at Citi. Do you want to talk about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started at Citi summer of 2000. So this was right after my freshman year at BC. And I participated in that internship through Inroads program. Inroads is an organization for diverse students that are focused on careers across corporate America. But for me, it was focused on the track that I was on was for the financial services industry. Again, going back to my major, being in finance, I wanted to get exposure working in a bank. And if it wasn't for that program and understanding that I could start that early, I'm not sure, where it would go. But but I did. So I started my summer after freshman year. I joined, again, as I mentioned before, this is all relevant. My experience in high school was during the dot-com boom, but what came shortly thereafter was the
Was the
bust.
bust. Yep.
So the bust really started that year in 2000. And so coming into that summer at Citi, I was experiencing firsthand, the downswing and then the going into that bust and seeing it firsthand. The group that I worked for was in treasury at Citi, and they had a team that they created called Citibank e-business, and e-business is all about how do we move forward, how does the bank move forward in this dot-com era, this era of technology, and putting things online and moving away from paper-based processes. That was the
Yep.
beginning of that. So it was a really exciting time, but is also I had a preview into what was to come with the dot-com bust, and kind of seeing how those decisions were made and dealing with some of the challenges and uncertainty. It was a new industry, new environment. People that had been there for 20, 30 years didn't have that experience in terms of what was coming ahead. So everyone was learning at the same time. I thought it was a really good opportunity for me to learn and to be a valuable contributor as an intern, because everyone was kind of going through this thing together, which I know is not the normal experience that you get in most internships, because in most internships, depending on the environment, the time period, it's a little bit more stable. This was a very new industry that was being carved out of a traditional industry. So that was my first summer. And that internship was in Connecticut. The next 2 summers, again, going back to what
Can
I
I
said,
just interrupt you for a second?
please, go ahead.
So a- after your summer there, what was it about Citi, or what was it about your experience that made you want to keep going, like keep spending your next 2 summers there?
Yeah, I don't know. Like it was a little bit of everything. It was a positive experience. I felt like I was valued. I was doing work that exceeded my expectations. I was doing things that went beyond, the stereotypical run and get coffee, or, type out something or work on something administrative. It was actually participating in an initiative, a milestone, and working together as a team. The environment that I was in, again, in those days, this wasn't the norm. Instead of cubicles or the senior leaders being in offices, they had these pods set up. There were 4-person pods, and you're in this square, very large cubicle where 4 people were at each corner. And so for me, that was another opportunity to learn directly from my manager and my 2 other colleagues that were on that specific team. I think that had something to do with it as well. Just being around them all day long, hearing what the decisions they were making, the angles that they were considering in terms of executing on strategy. I was there for it, and then the work that I was doing felt meaningful. So I think going into, or at the end of that summer, it just felt like, okay, I could do this. I'm not just some young kid that just was there for a few weeks. I was actually utilized. So maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe there's more opportunity ahead, and that's why I was really excited to go back for a second internship.
What do you think you did as an intern that allowed them to say, let's bring Sam back for another internship? Because I mean, I'm sure there were people that didn't get return offers. What do you think you did different, or any piece of advice for interns out there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I took it really seriously. It wasn't a joke. I took all my responsibilities very seriously. I asked tons of questions. I got a chance to meet a lot of people, and I did that intentionally. I also, did some of the things that we always talk about, right? First person in, last person to leave. I didn't leave until my boss left, that kind of thing.
Mm.
So, that was my focus. That's how I approached the job. I took it very seriously, and I had an opportunity to go around and meet different people, ask them questions about their careers, tell them a little bit about my story. So it was more than just, you know, this intern that sits in this seat. You know, there was more to me than that, right? People got to know who I was, know my personality, know my background, and that, I would think, behind the scenes had a lot to do with being invited back, because people got to know me that way, and they saw some potential based off of my work ethic and how I approached my job.
As a person of color, and again, to give perspective to the listeners, I mean, we're talking about 20 years ago. You know, I it I say what you want to say about different business companies, but let's just say diversity and inclusion wasn't as prominent as it is today. But 20 years ago, was it something that you were aware of, that you were a person of color working in this New York City office, or Connecticut office, or did the work you did kind of, color wasn't really being seen?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. It has a lot of layers to it. I would say, my perspective coming in, was shaped by my previous experiences. So thinking it back to my upbringing, being in a part of a Haitian community, that was one experience. Then public school in elementary school and for the first year of middle school, more diverse, and then pivoting to an all boys private school in Greenwich, Connecticut, where there wasn't a lot of diversity. I think that variety of perspectives helped me, right? Because I kind of saw all angles. I saw it all, and I got comfortable in each of those environments. So I walked into this internship being comfortable with whatever was going to be the situation. I recognized it. I thought about diversity. I thought about representation, being, what would I be, the only Black employee, Black intern,
Yeah.
etc.? Sure, I did. But I was going to be comfortable with whatever the environment was, just based off of my own previous background. I also think what I saw had a lot to do with my ability to have some longevity there. So my first manager, again, first corporate job as an intern, first manager was a Black woman. I
Nice.
think
Yeah.
that subconsciously, in a very subtle way, that had an impact. I don't remember calling that out outright, but I know that, looking back on it, that had some influence. That, okay, you can have Black women in senior leadership roles, or you can have Black people in senior leadership roles, and more influentially, that I could be that. I could get there.
Yep.
That possibility exists for someone like me. So it was more subtle, but it was my previous experiences coupled with my first impression in my first internship that first summer.
Yeah. I guess. I mean, so I guess, did you want to talk more about the other two, or um
I'll just say briefly, I
yeah.
mean, the difference in the other two, you know, I moved business lines in my last two, so it was like a rotation kind of a thing. And I got a chance to work in the city, in New York City, commuting in from Connecticut, taking the Metro North End, which I felt like an adult doing that with the rest
Yeah.
of the commuters. Different environment, faster paced. And that experience being in Manhattan for those last two internships really solidified the beliefs that I had, or the view and vision that I had going back to when I was 11 or 12, where I knew I wanted to be in the city. It just confirmed that.
Yeah.
And so it just helped me to figure out, okay, as soon as I can, this is where I'm going to be. I love that experience. And that was a really helpful part of those last two summer internships leading into, my last year at BC. What was also really nice is that I had a job lined up going into my senior year. I can't imagine, the stress that, a student might have navigating, looking for work, looking for beginning of their, corporate employment, uh, during your maybe second semester senior year without having a job lined up. That could be an added stress that, thankfully, and gratefully I didn't have to navigate. So that also goes to the positive experience I had wrapping up my time at BC.
As you started at Citi, I guess looking back on, your career there, what are some things you did right? What are some things, um, to give some context? You did at least 5 roles, or maybe even more. Uh, so can you talk about what it was like transitioning,
Mm-hmm.
from a business analyst to, a vice president and things of that nature?
Every time I changed roles or received increased responsibilities, it was a learning experience. You know, it really was. And for me, I did move around. Just by some background and context, the internship that I was a part of became a full-time analyst role after college, which is a very similar format to what exists today. So I did a 2-year rotational program within the institutional clients group at Citi in the institutional business. Moved around quite a bit, spent some time in offshore banking, in capital markets, and in asset management as I navigated the early years of my career. Some people, there's two paths you can take, right? You can work your career up vertically through one channel and just keep on moving up within that specific area, or you could kind of navigate around, move around, and get different experiences and moving laterally in order to get that experience to then move vertically. So for me, I chose the latter, moving laterally around the organization. I did that intentionally, and it's still something that has, looking back on it, had some positive benefits. But there's not a right or a wrong answer there. There are very successful people that I started out with that stayed in one area and moved their way up. In some cases, their trajectory was a lot faster. Their promotion rates might have been faster as well. So, but then there's other people that do what I do that had the opportunity to move around. They took those opportunities. I took opportunities not just to move around in terms of different roles, but also geographically. So early on in my career, I did a short-term mobility assignment in the Bahamas. I then did a short-term mobility assignment in Zurich, Switzerland.
Wow.
And to this day, both of those opportunities are, two of the highlights of my career, for a couple different reasons. One, this is pre-crisis. The industry was different back then. I was able to see a lot of things and being part of different businesses that are run in different locations. And that opened my eyes to, the juxtaposition between a very New York centric headquartered business versus a business that is outside the New York area, like in the Bahamas, and then in Switzerland. Also, from a diversity perspective, just seeing the difference in backgrounds and culture, being around different types of employees with different types of personalities, the way they go about achieving similar results in a very different way was an eye-opening experience, and no doubt that had a positive impact on me as I learned, being able to see how things can be done differently to achieve the same goals. So that was my early on experience, and I benefited from that. I love the experience to live in different countries, to come back to New York, to use that to be more globally, to have a global mindset, which was helpful. That was pre-crisis, as I mentioned. In terms of some of the challenges, I would highlight, you mentioned, going from, assistant vice president to vice president. That was around the time of the financial crisis. And at that time I was in an asset management role, doing or handling trusts and supporting the trust business. And that was during the financial crisis. And it was a terrible time for global economy, especially in the US, and being in this industry, much talked about documentaries, movies on the subject, so we won't go into it, but I lived it. I was there. And for me, it wasn't the concern of being let go fired, as many other people were during those days. I was still early in my career. That wasn't my biggest concern, but it had a profound impact on the decisions I would later make in my career. And more specifically, just to go into a bit, it was a demoralizing time for many people.
Yeah.
And what I saw firsthand was the difference between good leadership and bad leadership. I saw it.
Yeah.
Good leadership, and in times of uncertainty, looked very different, and it was easy for me to see. Good leadership, as an example, would be, I recall vividly leaders on that floor getting up on top of their desks during the height of all this craziness, when people are thinking about their livelihood, thinking about their families, the future of their own careers. And this leader got on top of this desk and said, listen, I don't have answers. I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. If you want to talk to me, I'm here. That's great leadership.
Yeah.
But then you see the opposite, where there are other leaders that didn't show up, that were hiding in their office, maybe not coming in. Employees that they've been working with for a number of years being let go, and not being there to say goodbye to them, or at least having the decency to do that. So I saw that firsthand. For me, that was an interesting perspective to see firsthand every day, and that helped me to make some decisions about what I want to do with the rest of my career. That moved me I shifted my career path, and I went into more management support type of roles, chief of staff roles, CAO roles, that allowed me to support or be around leaders to help them, one, ideate on strategy and then execute against it. That's the operational stuff, but also thinking big picture on the roles of leadership and what the part that I can play to help management make the right decisions and think of their employees first and foremost, to drive growth, to drive belonging, to drive value, both internally and externally. So it was that experience of going through the financial crisis that helped me to kind of change gears a little bit in my career.
Can you also talk about, I think in the modern era right now, a lot of people entering, whatever industry it is, are told spend 2 years here, at this company, gain some skills, then go to a different company, spend 2 years there. Like, that ends up being the norm for a lot of people just starting out their career. Obviously, you had a different path. You spent 19 years in one place, and that's something that I think I don't know the numbers, but I think for the majority of people probably is not gonna be what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about maybe some of the benefits of being in one place for that long, and things of that nature, and what you took, like maybe you still gained. I mean, obviously you gained different skills while still being at the same company.
Right. So in previous generations, people worked for one company in one industry their entire lives. Like,
Yeah.
that's just how it was. Things have changed, as we progress as a society. That is no longer the traditional path. Now people change industries, they change jobs within the same industry. They leave, they go somewhere else, and they come back. The boomerangers. So it's changed. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the path that I took, at Citi, and being for one company for that long, uh, I did it in a unique way. For me, it wasn't staying at one company for so long. For me, it was getting a chance to really appreciate the breadth and scope, the globality of that organization. Talking about 200,000 employees in 96 countries, being in one team in one department. You might not have that full appreciation for the full company, right? So what I try to do is by moving around, it gave me a better appreciation for the entire company. So I moved around. It was almost like doing different jobs at different companies. It was all within one larger company. So I did benefit from that movement, that mobility, that helped to give me the perspective that I needed as I navigated my career and what decisions I needed to make to get to the next place in my career. So someone else at a smaller company, you wouldn't have that same opportunity to have that type of lateral mobility. So what do? Go somewhere else. So we see that it's done in different ways. For me, I ended up staying at a place for 19 years. Wonderful time there, broadly. But I think part of it was because I was able to learn a lot by moving around internally and leveraging those opportunities. And the fact that companies provide that opportunity around mobility is, I think, is great, because it harps on and it touches on some of the things that people are looking for, getting different exposure, being part of different things. But today, you see a mix of people that stay, they work their way up vertically, or they might stay for 2 years and then go somewhere else, maybe within the same industry, or trying something completely different, or going back to school.
Yeah. And then towards the last 2 years at Citi, you were a senior vice president of global diversity and talent management. Talk about that role and kind of what brought you to that, and I guess you know broadly, what does that role include for people that don't know?
Yeah. Um, it was it was a tremendous opportunity. I think back to those couple of years in a very positive and favorable way. I had an opportunity to work with really tremendous people, leaders, innovative thinkers, different styles of management and leadership, many of which, I took notes on and wanted to emulate. So it was, in general, in broad terms, it was a really positive experience. The timing is really interesting. Some of the current social climate, and this environment that we're in right now is, it's not in of itself new, right? It's been something that we've been dealing with as a society for a longer time. But back when I started in that role, um, some of the things that we're talking about today, or some of the things that came up back then. And in terms of the social climate, for me, it was a mix of a couple different reasons why I looked for that opportunity. And touching on some of the things that we've already talked about, I wanted to be in a role where I could see a little bit of everything that was happening across the entire organization. So I wanted to be in a firm centric area, somewhere where I could see the different products and services that we provide, the different divisions, and how decisions are made, not just across different divisions, but also across different regions as well. So this opportunity of being part of that global diversity and talent management team was an opportunity to look across the entire firm, to look at all the different regions that were operating in at that time, but also getting a chance to work with different leaders, high profile senior leaders, and how they run their businesses. The role itself was a talent and diversity role, focused on strategy and executing on talent and diversity strategies, things such as succession planning from a talent perspective, or how to attract diverse talent to the organization, how to promote and develop the diverse talent that we do have, and how to retain them. And then the culture that kind of sits across all of those. What was really interesting, is that the role brought in that strategy piece, which I wanted, exposure across the entire company, which I wanted, and the focus on data and analytics, right? How do we use data to inform the decisions that we make, especially when it comes to processes, and talent and people, right? So it was a mixture of those things that really led me to that role, and I really benefited greatly from it. And it was an experience that I learned a lot, and I felt like I was able to contribute a lot to that role.
And then obviously, you are now at Morgan Stanley. So talk about that transition. You made that about a year ago, um, and how it's been going so far.
Yeah, 1 year in, it's been a really positive experience so far. I would say the role that I'm in now, or the role that I accepted, is not is not the way it was intended to be. It wasn't the role that I had originally accepted, given the environment that we're in, right? With
Yeah.
the pandemic and the increased presence of the current social climate and the focus that it's had across all of society, including corporate America, um, changed a bit of the focus of the role. But the role is within the institutional business being, I like to think of myself as a trusted advisor, right? A trusted advisor to senior leadership to consider all angles of diversity, inclusion, and having a strategy, a multi-year strategy, a plan to bring it into that division or into the company, mixed with being a bit of a relationship manager. And I say that to say, part of my job is to get to know people, right? Not just the senior leaders, but the first year analysts, uh, people in different roles, people who have been there forever, diverse versus non-diverse, et cetera. So working on relationships, deepening relationships, getting to know people at a human level, what makes them tick, their sentiment, what do they care about, how do they react or respond to what's happening externally, how are they reacting to what's happening internally with management decisions, focus on certain initiatives, whether it's diversity related or not, and all the different ways that we can make progress and continue to build that inclusive culture, where at the end of the day you want to create a place or build on a culture where everyone can reach their fullest potential. That means different things for different people, just by nature of its definition. So the more you can get to know people, know their experiences, what they're bringing into work themselves personally, the more that you're able to contribute to decisions that will impact them positively going forward. So trusted advisor, relationship manager, strategic thinker, being able to collaborate well with others, understanding different perspectives, and being able to organize it in a way that operationally can be utilized and executed on.
In March of this year, obviously, we got into a pandemic. How has COVID-19 like changed how you've been approaching things? Has it, I mean, and again, this isn't a business example, but even in my life, my best friends and I are now talking to each other more. So has the culture, I mean, have you, how has that transition been?
Yeah, no, it's it's been a it's been a challenge, I would say, but also it 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 affirms some of the decisions that were made before the pandemic, right? No one could have predicted this environment that we're in, and the way that's had an impact across globally and across corporate America and across society. But the decisions that were made in advance allowed us to handle the challenges better, right? So, for example, being able to go remote and work from home, it's not the bread and butter of most organizations, but the organizations that had the infrastructure to do so fared better early on. Um, you know, Being able to, at any point, be able to work from home technically with the right infrastructure to remote in, to have all the tools that you need from any place, as long as you have access to, a computer or technology device, in order to get your job done, would be step number one. Not every place had that.
Mm.
So I'm fortunate to be at a place that had that infrastructure set up to be able to address some of those early concerns and challenges in a meaningful way. That doesn't mean it was easy, but the infrastructure, the foundation was there. Two, just having really, really smart people with diverse backgrounds, diverse skill sets, diverse perspectives to be able to meet this new challenge the right way, right? So having someone that has um, you know operational uh, operational subject matter expertise to be able to figure out what is needed in order to pull people out of a traditional work in the office environment like a trading floor and figure out what are all the angles to consider to be able to work from home. People with the know-how on just a human level to understand the challenges, not just with the technology piece, but the human piece of addressing it. Having different perspectives of people that, have families and understanding the challenges that would cause working from home and all the uncertainties that go with that, et cetera. I can go on and on, but
Yeah.
that mixture and that at the end of the day, that's what diversity inclusion is all about, is bringing all those different ideas and thoughts together to be able to make the right decisions, grow the business, work in an operationally efficient way. And that's what we saw early on with the response to the pandemic. Fast forward, as you go through time, it's not putting something into place and then kind of walking away from it. You have to assess how it's going. So that's something else that I think I've benefited from seeing, both as being part of it and reaping the benefits of it, is the consistent assessment of, are things working the way they're intended to work? What are some of the headwinds that are coming down the line that we need to address? What's the process for returning back into the
Mm.
office at
Yeah.
some, et cetera? All those different conversations need to happen. The timing of when those conversations happen are really important. Being able to think through things ahead of time, so you're proactive and not reactive, will save a lot of people from anxiety and stress. That's just not necessary. There's enough of that to go around externally anyway.
And given your role, um, I don't want to get you in trouble or anything, and so maybe you need to answer this from a personal perspective and not from as an employee of Morgan Stanley. But another thing that happened this year is obviously the social justice component of businesses and what businesses' roles and brands' roles are in the fight for equality and things of that nature. For you, as a leader at Morgan Stanley, or even just on a personal level, being in business for so long, what do you think is the role for companies, brands, uh, in diversity initiatives, in speaking out, and talking about voting or things of that nature? What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, just in terms of the current social climate, it's it's been it's been very much an aha moment for this industry, uh, more so than other social injustice causes in the past, and issues and events and tragedies in the past. This particular year has had a profound impact, society at large, and it just feels like an aha moment where there will be, you know, I'm a I'm an optimistic person, positive change, not just in the moment, but longer term. In terms of the role that companies have, or actually just all individuals, everyone has a part to play, right? I think it's the recognition that, you can't sit back and just let someone else, solve those types of problems. You have to be aware of them. You have to call it out. You have to understand what your role is. Um, but for me, in an emotionally charged environment like we've been experiencing this year, it's thinking back to, how does that relate to my job? My job is to work internally and figure out ways that we can create more inclusive cultures and environment. Um, and so that's where my focus has been, and helping to support, responses to the current environment with initiatives and actions that, are not just point in time, but really forward looking. right? So what you don't want is you don't want to be in a situation where, your actions die down with, the news cycle, where, as it's no longer making headlines, then no longer can you see the benefits and the actions that you've taken. So my role is to continue to encourage and push to make sure, along with many other colleagues, obviously, to make sure that we're 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 making decisions that don't just check a box today, but really have long lasting impact, not just for this year, but years out, right? Sustainable change, scalable change. And that's really what I'm seeing and I'm focused on, and continuing to, one, call it out, educate, create awareness where necessary, and to be there to support one another and our colleagues.
Awesome. One thing I didn't really get to is your personal life and, as you know, as you've grown in business to becoming the leader that you are, it requires long hours. It requires, you know, co- I mean, even this year, you see like the stress of having, companies having to change their business model and, start interns, you know, remote in the summer. How has that process been for you in terms of trying to balance your professional goals and aspirations and then also managing your personal life?
Yeah. So for me, just personally, I'm married with wife and two kids, two young girls, at this point, ages 6 and 4, and you know, dealing through this current environment, with the pandemic, and you think pre-pandemic, working in the office, working long hours, there are definitely certain challenges of having that balance that many people seek. Uh, but one of the positives that has come from all of this is being around my family even more so than I ever would be before. And it's been a blessing to be able to be, around my daughters day in day out when they're going through a very important time in their lives at that age developmentally, and to be there and to see it as much as possible and not just get reports back on it, right? So I've enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful experience. Yeah, there are some challenges that come along with it, but overall it's been a very positive experience for me. It makes me feel closer, and I am closer with my family than ever before, and I value that. And now I think about how do I carry that forward, in the future, right? So overall, very very positive experience. There are challenges, and for me, when you think about, you know, from a work perspective, career perspective, in the past, I've really benefited from, um, being front facing, right? Commercial, being, creating relationships and deepening those relationships with people that I work with, both internally and externally. And I miss not being able to see my colleagues face to face, talking to them day over day. So that's one thing I miss about it, and I do look forward to being able to have more of that. But in general, in this environment, glass half full and appreciating the benefits that I have is being able to be around my family much more, and supporting them through a challenging time as well.
Yeah. Has how is just being a father, like how did that change your life?
It, you know, I've talked a lot about having, and benefiting from different perspectives. I never would have imagined all the life lessons I would have experienced, that I've experienced from being a father
Yeah.
every single day. It could be, just work related lessons, like, honing in on my ability to multitask and do multiple things at once, and compete with conflicting priorities at times. That's that's one. but just just to better understand what even some of my other colleagues are facing. Without kids, I'm not sure I had the right perspective earlier on in my career of what employees with families are going through. And now that I do, I have a better appreciation for and empathy for others. I think that's a really big one. Two is I think the fact that I know that I now even know better that there's so much more I don't know. So the unknown and questioning the unknown has been something that I apply in my work now as being a father, because I didn't know about how to be a father before. Now I do, and I'm experiencing it head on. There are also other things that I don't know about what people bring into work with them or that they're experiencing outside of work. And being cognizant of that helps me to be a more inclusive leader. It helps me to think about the needs of others and just having conversations and getting to know our colleagues better. If you can do that, then you can better address situations, you can be proactive, you can create a much more comfortable environment, you can understand others better, which can only help you personally to grow, but also help your team to grow as well.
What are, I guess, in your, I guess, at least in regards to your business career, like trying to think of the best way to phrase this, but what do you think are the things that make you keep showing up to work again? What are some of the positives, and then I guess what are some of the challenges of being in this field?
Yeah, the thing that keeps me going back to work um, is that every day is not the same, right? If I had a core set of responsibilities that looked the same every day, I was going in doing the same exact tasks every day. Um, that wouldn't be for me, right? What I love about the roles that I've been in, this role and previous roles, is that there are new challenges, there are new opportunities, there are different things that I can be doing every day. No 2 days looks the same, and that gets me up in the morning. That excites me as I go about the day and wondering what today is going to bring. And there's a challenge in that. There's a level of excitement of navigating that I really like, and knowing that I've done it in the past and I've dealt with that type of an environment in the past helps me to appreciate where I can continue to add value. Right, I bring that perspective into team meetings. I bring that perspective into problem solving and looking at complex solutions. And again, that's not just me. Really, a lot of people benefit from and get excited by complex challenges and be able to solve them in different ways. So that keeps me going. That keeps me interested. I feel like I can really add value there. And at the end of the day, knowing that you can add value and be that person for your team, for your colleagues is really cool. Really cool. The other element for me personally that I've enjoyed is that in this role, it's not just about policies and processes. It's about people. I feel like I am in a role that is more than just generating revenue or decreasing expenses. It's about doing things that will impact people in a positive way that makes their experiences better. And it's almost, it's in service of that keeps me going and thinking about the bigger picture, the proposal to do more and to bring more value, not just to business processes, but to our employees. And frankly, in the role that I'm in now, it's not just about our employees, it's about making change and impact externally as well in the communities in which we serve. So seeing that across the board and knowing that the human element of that is part of the job is really cool.
If you could, you know, would you give your younger self any pieces of advice whether that be your younger self 10 years ago or younger self 15 years ago, do, do you think you would say, what do you think you'd say to yourself?
Yeah, you know, we see it in differences between generations. It seems like, you know, as generations and as time continues to move forward, people become less patient with what they're doing, right? They're always thinking about the next thing, and maybe that, what I would characterize as impatience is really just drive and getting ready for the next challenge and being determined and to keep it moving, which is positive. I would tell myself to slow down a bit, actually, to really appreciate all of the details in the role that I that I'm in, getting to understand all angles of whatever I'm working on or whatever the objectives of the team would be, instead of just doing it a little bit for a year and then moving on very quickly. Uh, Becoming a subject matter expert is not something that everyone has the opportunity to do, and really honing in on your craft, really focusing on it, and um, getting the most out of that experience can only help you in the long run as you make the next change in your career. So spending a little bit more time dissecting the details of what you do and why it's necessary, why other people within your immediate area, immediate team do what they do, can only help you out in the long run. So that's one piece of advice. The second is really spending time to get to know people, both personally and professionally. We talk a lot when we give career advice. We talk a lot about having a network, personal network, your own personal board of directors. Those are all really, really important points, and really, really good advice for all of us. I would just add on to that, just getting to know other people, spending the time to get to know them in a more detailed way, and not just superficial, uh, is only going to help you to have those intangible skills and perspectives that will help bring more out of you in whatever you do going forward.
Awesome. Sam, was there anything else that you wanted to hit on? We covered a good amount.
No, this has been great. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me on, Arnav.
Yes.
It was a pleasure to speak with you today.
Awesome. So, Sam, I just want to acknowledge you and uh, just the amazing work that you've done in growing from a summer analyst intern to becoming a senior vice president, and now as the executive director at Morgan Stanley. Um, I think there were a lot of great lessons that people starting their careers out, or that are, you know, maybe a couple years in, even a lot of lessons that they can learn from you in your experience, and moving laterally, and learning a lot of skills, and then moving vertically. And so I just want to thank you. um, I don't know if you want to put yourself out there like this, but if someone would like to reach you, is it possible for them to? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I
okay,
think LinkedIn would be the best way to go about it.
LinkedIn.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.